Welcome to week 4. In this step, we're joined by Krysia. If you'd like to know more about her or any of the team, you can read more information about us on the first step of this track. In previous weeks, we've learnt about how autistic people differ from non-autistic people and how these differences are identified through the diagnostic process. This week, we're going to be focusing on the psychological theories which have been used to try to explain autistic differences. Now, these theories have changed an awful lot through the course of autism research, and we're going to look first at some of the theories which have been debunked. So Krysia, which theory are we going to look at first?
We'll start first with the refrigerator mother theory. So this was a theory that was theorized by Bettelheim in the 1960s, and it attributed children being autistic to parents, and this was notably mums and female caregivers who had the burden placed on them in terms of blame, who were cold or inaffectionate to their children. George, can you tell me why this theory is not attributed to autism anymore?
Well, this theory has simply been disproved. So while they thought that autism could be caused by mothers being sort of cold and unaffectionate, it has since been shown that it's not possible to cause autism in this way. So one of the ways this has been proven is through the work of Rutter, who looked at children in Romanian orphanages, and these children have been terribly neglected and they seem to have some autistic traits. And so when he investigated this, the children, once they were placed in loving families, no longer had the autistic traits. They no longer appeared autistic. And so it showed that these children were not autistic. It's not possible to become a non-autistic person. And so that shows that it wasn't the neglect that caused that. So it's not possible for parents to cause autism in their children. It's still something that I think, even though this has been discredited very thoroughly, this theory, I think it's something that in the general population, ideas like this are still quite influential, and parents are often blamed for their autistic children's differences. What's the next theory we're looking at?
So the next one we have, George, is the extreme male brain theory. And this is a much more recent theory in compared to the refrigerator mother theory. And this emerged from Baron Cohen's empathizing systemizing theory. This is based on the assumptions that women have a preference for empathizing and men for systemizing, and that the autistic cognitive style is the extreme version of a typical male brain. George, can you tell me why this is problematic?
Well, it's problematic in a number of ways. And since then, while empathizing, systemizing was seen as a linear scale, as opposites of each other, that's something that even Baron Cohen has since sort of changed. So while autistic people are often very good systemizers, the idea of autistic people lacking in empathy is something that's been quite harmful to many autistic people, and particularly where there is a bias. We looked last week at the impact on autistic women, girls, and other marginalized gender identities. Within that, this theory has really contributed to the male bias that still dominates what is known about autism, as more boys and men are likely to be suspected as being autistic and then be put forward to receiving a diagnosis or being assessed. So let's move on to some of the main current theories of autism. Could you tell us a bit about theory of mind?
Sure. So theory of mind, when looking at autistic people as a theory, refers to autistic people having the inability to empathize with other people, and this includes other communication partners, and being unable to imagine other people's thoughts and feelings. George, is there experiences perhaps in your life that maybe exemplify theory of mind?
Sure. So I think this is one way that people understand autistic differences. There are many things, particularly in respect to social communication differences, which people could interpret in this way. So, for instance, if I'm talking to someone and I don't notice their facial expression that might communicate to me that they're upset, and so I respond to them in a way that doesn't acknowledge that they're upset, I'm then seen as rude or uncaring, or, you know, any number of things where I simply don't have that information about what's going for them. But that's not the same thing as not caring. So in a way, I prefer it. Sometimes this theory is described as mind blindness, and I think that is a better description. So I think a lack of awareness of what other people might be thinking or feeling is very different from not caring about those things. Can you tell us a bit about the critiques of this theory?
So although, as you've said, theory of mind captures what could be some of the social communicative differences with autistic people, the tasks which are used to test theory of mind, from the original data set, 20% of the autistic children did actually pass, and autistic people can learn to pass these tasks, which are known as false belief tests. And autistic strengths aren't really considered in this theory either. It very much is a very deficit focus in how it's framed. And this is echoed in the fact that theory of mind is only attributed to the autistic person, when we know communication is a two-way interactional situation that goes on. And I guess the kind of biggest thing for me as an autistic researcher is that the test that was used in the original paper in 1985, the Sally Ann test, was designed and administered by people, we don't know if they're researchers are autistic or not, but they didn't and don't identify as autistic. And it was very much designed using neurotypical standards of communication and sociability. And we know now that autistic people do respond differently to non-autistic people on these tasks. So we know these tasks are capturing something, but how accurately it's being captured is questionable, especially in light of recent evidence that's coming through.
Absolutely. I think in many ways, some of these tests, where they're designed by non-autistic standards of what's expected, it's often pretty much the same as judging a fish by its ability to ride a bicycle.
Exactly.
So let's move on to executive functioning. Can you tell us what executive functioning is?
So executive functioning is basically referring to the ability to maintain an appropriate problem-solving strategy to attain a future goal. So the kind of tasks which require executive functioning are changing tasks and switching attention and starting new tasks. Is there any times in your life, George, that you've experienced executive functioning difficulties?
Sure, I think this is quite a useful theory. It's something I certainly relate to, possibly because my executive functioning is really terrible. So there are lots of things that I struggle with around sort of starting and stopping things and sort of trying to make decisions on the spot. I'm much better if I can follow a plan. So one way this affects me is I really struggle to open my post because I don't know what's in there and it might require me to do something. And so I simply don't do it. It's something that I put off, and I actually need support for someone to come and help me to actually open it and then respond to the demands that are inside that. But it's the sort of thing that would really throw me otherwise. So are there any critiques of executive functioning?
I guess the major one with executive functioning is that other neurodivergent people, so people who have ADHD, may also experience executive functioning difficulties as well. So it's not really something that's unique to autistic people. And some autistic people can perform quite well on the tasks that measure executive functioning. So for example, the Tower of London task. And I guess the big one for me is it doesn't actually account for the way autistic people socialize, or our communication differences and the communication breakdown that can happen.
So it accounts for some aspects of being autistic, but not others.
Yeah.
Should we move on to weak central coherence? Can you tell us what is meant by the term weak central coherence?
So weak central coherence refers to the fact that autistic people have a preference for fine detail in pools of information rather than pulling information all together and processing an overall meaning. Is there times, George, that perhaps you've experienced weak central coherence, or you feel it's been particularly applicable in your life?
Yeah, I think this is quite a useful theory. I think it's something that I certainly relate to, and I think it can account for quite a lot of autistic strengths. So there are certain things where attention to detail is really, really useful. I think it contributes to me being good at things like proofreading, where I will notice small details that others might not. There's other times when this aspect of being autistic is not so useful. So I might focus on details when I'm not supposed to. When I've been writing an essay, I might get caught up in a very sort of detailed topic and spend hours researching it to death, when actually I only needed to write a paragraph on that, and I've ignored the rest of the essay because I've been so focused on those details. So it's a strength, but it can also create some difficulties as well.
I very much agree with that, in terms of it being very strengths based, but actually it can be understand in things we struggle with as well.
Have there been any critiques of the weak central coherence theory?
I guess one of the main ones is that it has been found that autistic people can process whole blocks of information. It's a preference rather than a direct autistic people can only do this. And it also doesn't cover the interactional nature of the social communication in the same way that theory of mind does, much in the same way that executive functioning misses this aspect of autistic experience. Weak central coherence misses it as well.
I think that's a key thing within these three theories. None of them accounts for all autistic differences. Different theories seem to account for different aspects of being autistic, but there's no one sort of unified theory which explains everything about autistic people.
Yeah, completely agree.
So in the next step, we're going to look at some more recent theories that have been developed to explain autistic differences.